Hello, welcome everyone. My name is Dylan Robbins. I'm the director of the Center for Latin American and Caribbean Studies. I wanted to welcome you this evening. Before we get started, I just wanted to let everyone know that we are going to enable simultaneous interpretation for you. And if you wouldn't mind, we would like to walk you through the process of it. Please bear with us as we do so. Close captioning. Olbin is now going to explain to us how to tune into. You should be able to see in your menu bar. Olbin, would you please explain to the public?
Surely. Thank you so much, Dylan. Good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thank you for welcoming me into your space. I will be your interpreter this evening for this event. It will be a bilingual space, thus we will be enabling interpretation in a second. Once the interpretation feature has been enabled, if you are on an iPhone, any sort of Mac or tablet, you will go to the bottom of your screen where you will find a globe. And once you see the globe, you will then be able to choose Spanish or English as your main language for the event. If you are bilingual, you do not need to select a room. If you are monolingual English or a monolingual Spanish speaker, you would then select those rooms and remain in those rooms. And then I will toggle back and forth between those rooms during the session. You needn't move from that room. If you are on an Android phone and you're joining us or any type of Android device, once the interpretation feature has been enabled, you will go to the bottom right hand corner of your screen, whereupon you will find an ellipsis or three little dots. You will click on those three little dots or ellipsis and you will see the word more, M-O-R-E. You will click on that word and then it will then give you the interpretation feature. Again, English or Spanish, and you will remain in those rooms during the duration of the event. Thank you so very much.
I want to give everyone a second, please, to make sure that you have been able to do so. Please let us know if you're having any issues in toggling that on. Olvin, can you see on your end? Does it look like it's been set up to do that?
Unfortunately, I do not see it as of yet, Dylan.
Okay, thank you for letting me know. Oh, there it is. Great. And we will choose. Okay.
It can be English or Spanish to English. The order doesn't really make a difference.
Great. And yeah, it should be. Are you seeing it now, Olvin?
Yes, I don't see it yet.
Bear with me then. Apologize here. I found the setting, Olvin. I'm going to share my. Oh my gosh.
Sure.
Do you mind? I'm going to just share my screen
Not
with
at
you so
all.
you see. I apologize to everyone here. This is something I've not worked on this part. So if you'll just so here we are, Olvin. I've wanted to make sure that you have that available for you. So apologies again for the delay, but thank you for joining us. My name is Dylan Robbins. I'm the director of the Center for Latin American and Caribbean Studies. Before we get started, I wanted to begin with an acknowledgement that we have prepared and that we use regularly with all of our events at the Center for Latin American and Caribbean Studies. I'm going to first read it in English, and then we're going to be followed by the same acknowledgement read in Creole by Leigh Edmonds. So I want to start by acknowledging that our center rests on indigenous Lenape Manhattan homeland. As we gather in this virtual space, we ask you to join us in acknowledging the Lenape Manhattan community, elders, both past and present, as well as future generations. Manhattan derives from Manhattan, which means hilly island, just like the name Haiti, which is a Taino word meaning the same thing, and a place whose people's language Creole is taught here, and also too in the territory of the ancient Lenape Manhattan, the language and culture of another ancient nation is taught today, the Quechua language of the Andes. Lay.
Bonjour tout le monde. I'll be reading the land acknowledgement in Creole. Avant nous continuer, nous reconnaître qui sont sa chita, souti, indigène moun Lenape Manhattan. Pendant notre fait, rassemblage ça vitulement, notre mandé nous reconnaître qui minote Lenape Manhattan. Grandette yo qui présent, ancien, yo qui déjà passé ak génération kabini yo. Nous Manhattan soti nanbu Manhattan qui vle di yon zile qui gen un peu mon. Men janak non Haiti an qui se yon mo taino qui vle di men bagay. Epi nan men ancien territoire Lenape Manhattan sa kote nou ye konyenya nou ap ansien yon lot lang ak kilti ki ancien men jan man Quechua a qui sote nan region Andes.
Thank you, Lay. Once again, on behalf of the Center for Latin American and Caribbean Studies, I wanted to welcome all of you for the opening of event of the Spring 2024's Research Colloquium. Since 1966, the Center for Latin American and Caribbean Studies at New York University has been offering support and space to serve as a crossroads for conversations, interdisciplinary conversations about Latin America and the Caribbean. We also host what is called the Indigenous and Diasporic Languages Consortium, which is an agreement with the CUNY system, particularly with the Mexican Studies Center at Lehman College, through which NYU offers the most widely spoken indigenous language in the Western Hemisphere, which is Quechua courses to not only NYU students, but also to students at CUNY. And similarly, Haitian Creole classes through up to the advanced level as well to not only NYU students, but also CUNY students, in addition to two other indigenous languages spoken in Mexico, Mixtec and Nahuatl. It is through this Indigenous and Diasporic Languages Consortium that CLACS at NYU really continues to support what are parts of its mission in offering or supporting knowledges that are not necessarily always reflected in many of the other departments and units at universities or in other university settings, and making sure that those are integral parts of a student's undergraduate curriculum, as well as availability for research support for faculty and graduate students. The Research Colloquia is sort of like the center's publication, and every spring it invites faculty from different parts of the university to design an interdisciplinary graduate seminar, and to also host and organize a research colloquium to accompany it. And over the years, different faculty from different departments have brought together their expertise and their different knowledges of fields to create what are some of the more unique teaching and learning experiences and research opportunities for both students and graduate students at the university. I would like to take a moment to introduce the organizers of this spring's colloquium course, which is called Critical Voices in Environmental and Racial Justice. First, we have Professor Kaya Shivers of the Department of Liberal Studies. And Professor Shivers is a clinical assistant professor, as I said, in liberal studies, and who focuses on writing, journalism, and food sustainability. She has been a media practitioner for almost 3 decades and currently runs an award-winning Arc Republic News. For the past 7 years, Dr. Shivers has worked in the food space as an editor-reporter and is a media studies scholar focusing on how diasporas employ media as a source of agency in defining identity. In 2020, Dr. Shivers launched the Black Farmers Index, an online directory listing Black growers in the U.S. and its territories, and has shifted her focus to agriculture. The project has been a way to deal with coming food shortages that are projected to occur within the United States. For her work, she has been consulted by the USDA as well as the Organic Trade Association to provide insight of Black farmers in the U.S. as a way to diversify agribusiness and to create best practices of justice, equity, and inclusivity. And in spring 2022, Dr. Shivers' course, A Seat at the Table, Food Security in Communities of Color, was approved to be offered at one of NYU's satellite campuses in Abu Dhabi. One of the organizers of this course and lecture series is Dr. Pamela Calla. Professor Calla is a Bolivian anthropologist who's engaged with issues of gender, race, class, and state formation in Latin America. She's also currently a clinical professor at the Center for Latin American and Caribbean Studies at New York University and has received the Dr. Martin Luther King Faculty Award in 2016 and 2017. She co-created and coordinates the Feminist Constellations platform, which is, and also the Working Group on Racisms in Comparative Perspective. And she is the co-founder of the Observatory on Racism in Bolivia between 2007 and 2017, and the Red de Acción y Investigación Antirracista en las Américas. She's also, which is an initiative launched at the Universidad de la Cordillera in Bolivia and the Teresa Lozano Long Institute of Latin American Studies at the University of Texas at Austin. As part of the RAR at the RARE, the Red de Acción e Investigación, she's participated in the collaborative research action process and a book called Black and Indigenous Resistance in the Americas, from Multiculturalism to Racist Backlash, with a chapter entitled The Difficulties of Connecting Anti-Extractivist and Anti-Racist Struggles in Contemporary Bolivia, The Weight of Patriarchy. She's the co-editor, furthermore, of Antropología del Estado, Dominación y Prácticas Contestatarias en América Latina. And she was the associate researcher of the state in Bolivia, a project of the Informe sobre Desarrollo Humano in 2007, the United Nations Development Project, and co-editor and author of Observando el Racismo y Regionalismo en el Proceso Constituyente Boliviano, Agenda Defensorial, and also Defensor del Pueblo at the Universidad de la Cordillera in Bolivia. And also Professor Leo Douglas. Dr. Leo Douglas is a full-time clinical associate professor in liberal studies at New York University. He is the immediate past president of Birds Caribbean, which is the largest international NGO focusing on the conservation of birds and their habitats within the greater Caribbean region. He received his PhD from Columbia University in ecology, evolution, and environmental biology, and holds a Columbia University degree in environmental policy. Oh, did I skip that? I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, I missed that. Holds a Columbia University degree in environmental policy. Yeah. Previously, Dr. Douglas taught about conservation, conflicts conservation, marketing, and global diversity at Columbia University and St. George's University. In 2012, he co-founded and was directed an organization working to conserve biodiversity in Latin America and the Caribbean, namely the Conservation Leadership in the Caribbean Fellowship Program, CLIC, as well as serving as the former co-chair of the Society of Conservation Biology, SCB's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusivity Committee. His previous professional experiences include work at the United Nations Development Program at the United Nations in New York City. Before that, Professor Douglas served as a project manager in the United States Agency for International Development, USAID in Jamaica, and and also the executive director of BirdLife Jamaica. He has described his work as nature and society geography, and it lies at the complex nexus of human-environment relations within space, place, biodiversity, and society. Additionally, Professor Douglas is the 2018 Musgrave Medal recipient and a past recipient of the Government of Jamaica's Millennium Scholarship, a Fulbright Scholarship, and an American Museum of Natural History Fellowship. His research has been published in the journals Biodiversity and Conservation, Biotropica, Environment and Society, the Journal of Caribbean Ornithology, and Biological Conservation, among several book chapters. I want to thank our three organizers and conveners for creating this really fascinating colloquium course and for teaching a really captivating class this spring. And thank you for organizing this. And I wanted to turn it over now to Leo Douglas. But before so, I also wanted to thank our co-sponsors as well. But actually, I'll leave that to Leo to mention, actually. So I'm going to pass it over to Leo now. Thank you, everyone, and thanks for joining us.
Actually, I'm just going to jump right in because
Sorry
I'm representing the co-sponsor. It's just smoother. It's fine. Hello, everyone. My name is Jonna Vitale. I'm the Assistant Director in the Office of Sustainability at NYU. I'm also the co-chair for the Environmental and Racial Justice Network. And I'm so pleased to be here. Thank you for having me. And we're really excited to be co-sponsoring this speaker series. It's of utmost importance to us because in the Office of Sustainability and along with our partners in the Office of Global Inclusion, we want to see a lot of progress made at the intersection of environmental and racial justice, along with other social justice movements. And we want to see that our students get to learn about this intersection and how they can build their careers in this space. We want to just point out that a lot of people in the US don't think of people that look like the organizers of this group, of this event, or people that look like them when they're putting together their job boards and different things. And we want to make sure that our students are getting that diversity and that experience to know that people in this space can be people of color. And even in my own office, I am a token person, and I'm hoping to see that progress continue through the future. So hopefully this colloquium can serve that purpose of educating students and letting them know that they too can build their careers in this space. So thank you so much for having me here, and I look forward to hearing from our wonderful speakers. I'll hand it back to Leo.
Thank you so much, John, and thank you to everybody. Thank you, Dylan. I am going to start by giving further and important background about why are we here and what are we talking about today. Please allow me to share my screen, and I hope that you are able to see what's on the screen. Again, thank you to Professor Kaya Shivers and Pamela Kaye. I am so honored to be taking this journey with them. So this project was inspired by the work of the lady you just saw, Ms. Jonna Vitale. During COVID, the experience that we had, the murder of George Floyd, what happened in Central Park that we all witnessed with birding, several events led us here at NYU to think deeply and seriously about the intersectionality of environmentalism and the ongoing racism that faces so many communities here and abroad today. So in addition to the work of the Environmental and Racial Justice Network, we went on to write a grant successfully through the NYU Center for the Humanities with the support of my home department, Liberal Studies, which was later then also supported in the implementation phase by the NYU Center for Latin American Caribbean Studies. And this work was co-partnered with Mani Patel, who was the co-director of the Critical Voices Working Group. A part of this process, the Environmental and Racial Justice Network asked us and invited us in a full-day summit in the fall of 22 to think about these very, very important questions. How do we make erasure visible? The voices, the experiences, the scholarship, the triumphs, the work of those that have been working at the forefront of the environmental movement visible, centered, and give greater voices to those who are marginalized, those who sometimes often are overwhelmingly affected by environmental degradation, pollution, and the onslaught of the climate crisis. How do we better capture and center the achievements of leaders, change makers, those who are putting their shoulders to the wheel every day for the real work of what needs to be done to have a safer, more healthy environment, clean water, clean air, accessible food, all of the things that we care about and that we need in today's world to survive. How do we support and raise BIPOC scholars who are doing the work of change and often, unfortunately, feel the heat, sometimes unfortunately paying with their own safety and even their own lives? And how do we continue to confront the resistance to critical theory that has become such a part of society today, where feminist theory, critical race theory, anything that seeks to give voice, enhance, and center the marginalized can receive such swift and severe backlash from leaders, communities, and those with power. So as a part of this journey, we looked at several publications, and I'm just showing you a brief blog here, and it's entitled Climate Change on the Frontline, Why Marginalized Voices Matter in Climate Change Negotiations. And on the side, you can see where I'm just highlighting some of who we are talking about when we're talking about the marginalized. You know, those who have been excluded, systematically oppressed, persecuted, silenced, underserved, represented, and stigmatized. And while I've not prepared an exhaustive list, we're often talking about those who society deems as living in poverty or poor, BIPOC, racial or cultural minorities, women, members of the LGBTQ+ community, and those whose lives and practices have been criminalized. And pulling a quote from that document that you just saw, that blog, just one line, it says, there seems to be a prevailing narrative that when you are from the global South or from marginalized communities, you're nothing but a victim. And today we're here to mash down that lie, in the words of a Jamaican politician, to show that those who we frequently think as victims are actually those often, and in this case, clearly shown, the ones who have contributed so much to the conservation of an area which is central to the region of Latin America and the Caribbean. Just want to point out that, you know, we are in an event which is embedded in a class called Critical Voices in Environmental Racial Justice. One of the many books that we'll be looking at in this course is the iconic book recently published by Leah Thomas, Intersectional Environmentalists. And here's a quote that I love from Leah's book. "We cannot save the planet without uplifting the voice of its people, especially those most often unheard." So without any further reference, I would like to introduce our two speakers today, and I'll try my best to keep these introductions as brief as possible. First, I'd like to introduce Kelvin. Kelvin Alie is the Senior Vice President of Strategy, Delivery, and Field Partnerships at Conservation International. He's a national of the Commonwealth of Dominica. Kelvin leads a team that supports strategic development, project design, delivery, and safeguards of global portfolio of programs and projects with a focus of achieving the organization's priorities to protect nature and stabilize the climate, doubling ocean protection, expanding nature-positive economics. Kelvin remit also includes overseeing key strategic initiatives in the Americas with Afro-descendant communities and the expansion of Conservation International strategy, engagement, and partnership in the Caribbean with a focus on climate, oceans, and biodiversity. Kelvin has well over 20 years of experience working in international conservation and natural resource management. Thank you so much, Kelvin. I appreciate your presence so. We're also joined by Marta Rosario Pina, an Afro-Colombian woman and a Fulbright scholar like myself. Thank you, sister. With a PhD in environmental sociology from the University of Florida and a master's in environmental science and management from Wageningen University in the Netherlands, and a bachelor's degree in animal production from the National University of Colombia. Currently, Martha is the Director of Social Inclusion in Conservation Programs and leads the Afro in the Americas, Irreplaceable Regions and Resilient People Initiative for Conservation International. With a career spanning over 3 decades, Martha has conducted social and environmental research collaboratively with Afro-descendant people and indigenous people from regions of paramount conservation significance in various countries that share the Amazon region and the Colombian Pacific. Her most recent research was conducted with Moore Center for Science and the University of Florida and was presented at COP28. The study provides the most compelling evidence to date of the contribution of people of African descent to biodiversity conservation and climate mitigation, and its critical role in raising awareness of Afro-descendant peoples' inclusion in global conservation and decision-making. Welcome again, Martha and Kelvin. And without any further ado, I will hand over to Martha for her presentation. And I look forward to joining all of us towards the end for our question and answer. In the meantime, I encourage everybody to please share your thoughts, comments with us in the chat, and we will bring that back to our discussion in a few minutes at the end of our presentation section. Over to you, Martha.
Yes. Do you see my screen? Not yet?
We saw it, but it stopped.
Okay.
Oh, there it is.
Okay. Let me put it in full screen. Yeah. Okay.
I tell you, might want to go one slide before. Great, thanks.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. I will switch into Spanish. Sorry. Okay. Primero que todo, quiero saludarlos a todos. Quiero saber si me están escuchando, por favor. Do you hear me? First of all, I want to quiero comenzar agradeciendo al Centro de Estudios Latinoamericanos y del Caribe de la Universidad de Nueva York y sus representantes por la invitación a este coloquio. Precisamente lo que quiero presentar hoy en la tarde y noche tiene mucha relación con el papel de los pueblos afrodescendientes en la conservación de regiones de la América tropical importantes para la conservación biológica y la permanencia de la vida en el planeta. Primero que todo, quiero también resaltar que Conservación Internacional se ha propuesto fortalecer la diversidad, equidad e inclusión tanto en los equipos de sus oficinas como en el trabajo que realizan las diferentes regiones del mundo. La iniciativa Afro de Conservación en las Américas, a la cual hemos denominado Regiones Irreemplazables y Personas Resilientes, busca abrir caminos a la inclusión social en la conservación de grupos de la sociedad tradicionalmente pasados por alto por la sociedad mayoritaria. Y por ende estos grupos pues han sido invisibilizados en las políticas estatales en en términos generales, y que generalmente nosotros también los asociamos con zonas deprimidas de los centros urbanos y con indicadores como pobreza extrema y vulnerabilidad de todo tipo. Dicho esto, entonces quiero hacer énfasis en que la iniciativa de conservación afro en las Américas reconoce que este enfoque ha generado datos socioeconómicos cruciales pues, sobre pueblos que han sido invisibilizados, como el pueblo afro en las Américas, sobre todo en Latinoamérica, Suramérica. Sin embargo, queremos trascender esta visión en nuestra iniciativa afro y situarnos desde un enfoque de la contribución afro a las Américas, como le hemos llamado. Yo creo que este enfoque permite acompañar a los pueblos afro en esos procesos que ellos mismos están adelantando para lograr objetivos y acciones por el reconocimiento de sus derechos, la inclusión en la toma de decisiones sobre sus vidas y sus territorios. Y esta mirada es supremamente importante porque en Latinoamérica es más conocido el aporte de los pueblos afro al fútbol, a la música, a la cocina, que su silencioso aporte a la conservación de los ecosistemas, a la conservación de la biodiversidad, a la alimentación de los pueblos, incluso foráneos a las Américas, y a la economía de los países de las Américas. Entonces, por esto quiero comenzar por presentar los resultados preliminares de una investigación que pronto será publicada y que busca fortalecer argumentos para considerar a los pueblos afrodescendientes como actores valiosos, como interlocutores válidos para un diálogo más horizontal y aliados muy importantes en los esfuerzos para para abordar esa doble crisis climática y de pérdida de biodiversidad en el planeta. Entonces, dicho esto, quiero hacer un reconocimiento a quienes han participado en esta investigación. Este ha sido un esfuerzo conjunto entre científicos de varias instituciones, muchos de ellos del pueblo afro. Por ejemplo, está el Moore Center for Science de Conservación Internacional, el MIT Environmental Initiative, está the University of Florida, está nuestro amigo Dr. Leo Douglas de la Universidad de Nueva York que nos ha apoyado, y están nuestros colegas del Foro Afro Interamericano de Cambio Climático, entre otros. Entonces, quiero comenzar diciendo entonces que desde hace ya varias décadas las políticas ambientales políticas ambientales globales han ido gradualmente reconociendo el inmenso papel de los pueblos indígenas y las comunidades locales para abordar esa doble crisis de pérdida de biodiversidad y cambio climático, la crisis climática, pero el papel de los pueblos afrodescendientes en las Américas, sobre todo en la América tropical, ha recibido mucha menos atención. Entonces, creemos que esto es profundamente problemático. ¿Por qué? Porque es que en Suramérica, 133 millones, en Suramérica, 133 millones de personas se reconocen afrodescendientes. Esto es más o menos 1 de cada 4 personas. Y también sabemos por estudios del Rights Resource Initiative con la Universidad Javeriana de Bogotá y líderes de afrodescendientes de 16 países más o menos que realizaron una investigación sobre la presencia afro en Latinoamérica y nos dicen que nos indican que los pueblos afrodescendientes ocupan regiones que sumadas sus áreas aproximadamente son 2 millones de kilómetros cuadrados, lo que equivale esto más o menos a 2 veces y un poco más el área de Colombia. Pero también ellos van más allá y nos dicen que más del 70% de estas áreas están ubicadas en hotspots de biodiversidad y endemismo. Entonces, nosotros decimos, bueno, ¿y por qué ha habido este descuido en reconocer, digamos, el papel de los pueblos afro en la conservación? Y esto no es igual para todos los países de América del Sur o Latinoamérica. Pero creemos que una de ellas se debe al limitado conocimiento sobre el rol de los afrodescendientes en la conservación. Muy poco conocido y, como digo, no en todos los países es lo mismo. Otra razón puede ser la comprensión limitada del valor biológico de las tierras que ocupan los pueblos afro y el manejo que estos pueblos dan a los ecosistemas en estas regiones. Bueno. Entonces, en esta investigación empleamos métodos mixtos. Empleamos el análisis espacial, es decir, análisis de mapas geoespacial y análisis social, ambiental, histórico. Entonces, nos centramos solamente en las tierras reconocidas a pueblos afro. No porque en Latinoamérica no haya pueblos afro en otras regiones, sino que en estas regiones había datos pues disponibles para poder hacer el análisis. Entonces, nos enfocamos en 4 países que están aquí: Brasil, Colombia, Ecuador y Surinam. Bueno, entonces, en el análisis espacial encontramos que las tierras reconocidas a pueblos afrodescendientes suman más o menos 88.9 millones de hectáreas en los 4 países. Es decir, estos pueblos solo se les ha reconocido gobierno o manejo, se les ha reconocido en 88.9 millones de hectáreas. Esto es un poco menos del 1% si sumamos las áreas de estos 4 países. ¿Sí? Es un poco menos del 1% de las áreas. Si ustedes los ven aquí en color naranja, las áreas que nosotros hemos considerado y que están reconocidas. Lo mismo, y de nuevo, eso no significa que los pueblos afro están por todas partes en los 4 países. En Brasil, solamente sabemos que hay reconocidos el 0.34%. Colombia sí hay un poco más, el 5.03% de las tierras están reconocidas. En Ecuador, 0.54%, y en Surinam es el 1.05% de esa cantidad de tierras reconocidas. Entonces, en estas tierras reconocidas, nosotros lo que hicimos fue correlacionar estas tierras que vemos acá con variables como biodiversidad, carbono irrecuperable, pérdida de bosques, y además los comparamos con las tierras aledañas o buffer zones. Entonces, si vamos directamente entonces a los datos, permítame en un momento. ¿Sí? Esto nos ayuda pues a comprender un poco mejor los valores biológicos en las tierras reconocidas a pueblos afro. Entonces, en los hallazgos, nuestros colegas del More Center for Science nos indican que hay una alta biodiversidad y un alto carbono irrecuperable en estas tierras. Entonces, aquí a la izquierda vemos la biodiversidad y acá el carbono irrecuperable. Entonces, para recordar un poco qué es el carbono irrecuperable, esto se refiere a las reservas, las grandes reservas de carbono en la naturaleza, es decir, bosques, los bosques tropicales, los humedales, las tuberas, los bosques templados, los manglares, ahí hay almacenado carbono, ¿sí? Y este carbono es vulnerable a la liberación debido a la actividad humana. Si perdemos ese carbono, estas reservas no podrían ser restauradas para el 2050. ¿Y por qué hablo del 2050? Porque el 2050 es el tiempo calculado cuando el mundo debe alcanzar emisiones netas cero para evitar esos impactos del cambio climático drásticos y punto de no retorno. Entonces, vemos que en el mapa de la izquierda, en azul más oscuro, como les digo, muestra que más o menos un 65% de las áreas reconocidas a pueblos afrodescendientes albergan una alta biodiversidad. Más o menos esto significa que es una porción que está más o menos entre el 10% más alto en riqueza de especies a nivel mundial. Estas tierras albergan un total de casi 4.000 especies, de las cuales el 9% están amenazadas según la lista roja de la IUCN. Y acá el carbonio irrecuperable, o sea, toda esa cantidad de ecosistemas que albergan, que se albergan ahí en estas tierras, más o menos, dicen los estudios, que contiene entre niveles muy altos y altos de carbonio recuperable, es decir, más o menos 25 o más toneladas de carbonio recuperable por hectárea, y debido a esto estas tierras son esenciales para mantener el clima bajo control. Esta otra diapositiva nos muestra que las tierras de los pueblos afrodescendientes no solo tienen una alta biodiversidad, ¿sí? Y un alto carbonio recuperable, sino que también son altas comparadas con el promedio nacional y con las zonas aledañas, ¿sí? Entonces, aquí vemos tanto para la biodiversidad. Estas son las tierras reconocidas a las comunidades, estas son las buffer zones y este es el promedio nacional. Bueno, esta diapositiva muestra la pérdida de bosques y nos indica que las tierras reconocidas por los pueblos afro están bajo presión. Estas figuras nos muestran una pérdida de bosques entre los años 2000 y 2021. Entonces, estamos viendo que el bosque está disminuyendo incluso en los 4 países, aunque en las tierras afrodescendientes es mucho menor la pérdida de bosques, aunque ya estamos viendo aumentos. Bueno, entonces nosotros decimos, bueno, que el enfoque sociohistórico nos dice por qué aún estas tierras de los pueblos afrodescendientes muestran estos indicadores, estos datos altos en biodiversidad, carbono irrecuperable y comparado incluso con otras tierras. Entonces, sabemos que la revisión de literatura que realizamos con base en estudios de muchos científicos, tanto sociales como también antropólogos, sociólogos, en fin, los historiadores nos dan cuenta del conocimiento y el legado botánico de África a las Américas, ¿sí? Del trópico de África al trópico de las Américas. Esta revisión nos indica que los pueblos afrodescendientes, tanto en su condición de esclavización en plantaciones como en su trasegar en medio de la selva cuando huían de sus captores y se convertían en maroons o cimarrones, en ambas situaciones se reportan prácticas culturales y ambientales adaptativas que respaldan sistemas sostenibles de producción agrobiodiversos, de manejo de ecosistemas forestales de las Américas que se conservan hasta hoy. Los afrodescendientes llegaron con un acervo de domesticación de plantas y animales de más de 15.000 años de antigüedad. Muchas de las especies que hoy conforman nuestra dieta y nuestra economía llegaron por el África en los barcos de esclavizados. Estos pueblos ya en África constituyeron los llamados bosques de alimentos, conocimiento que trajeron a las Américas en contraposición a los monocultivos europeos. Las comunidades afro replicaban las estructuras de dosel del bosque para usos medicinales, rituales, agrícolas, y los marún escondían cultivos y no quemaban para no ser descubiertos por sus captores. Estas prácticas no solo respaldaron la resistencia de las comunidades afro, sino que también ayudaron a los mismos europeos a adaptarse a entornos tropicales. En resumen, lo que quiero decir es que esto ha conducido a una profunda conexión entre las comunidades afro y sus entornos, ¿sí? Que aún es vigente en muchas regiones de América tropical. Entonces, yo quiero terminar concluyendo con 3 puntos fundamentales. Uno es que dada la importancia ambiental, las amenazas a las tierras afro y sus prácticas aquí mencionadas, es crucial que la comunidad global apoye a los pueblos afrodescendientes para construir su bienestar sobre la base de sus conocimientos, de su identidad cultural, de sus creencias, y que se reconozca su liderazgo en conservación y cambio climático. Segundo punto, los acuerdos globales ambientales, las agencias gubernamentales y los gobiernos deben incluir a los pueblos afro en la toma de decisiones ambientales. Esto apoya y respalda sus procesos y sus quehaceres internos. Por último, apoyar el reconocimiento de las reclamaciones de las tierras de los pueblos afrodescendientes en América Central y Suramérica va de la mano con el papel que los pueblos pueden cumplir con los objetivos globales de conservación. Por ejemplo, el Acuerdo de París. También pueden contribuir en eso que se ha propuesto el planeta, que es el 30%, conservar el 30% de la biodiversidad global para el marco mundial de biodiversidad. Bueno, muchísimas gracias. Y paso de la palabra a mis compañeros.
Thank you so much, Martha. I'm going to go straight ahead before I make any comments and hand over to Kelvin for his component of the presentation.
Thank you, Leo. I'm going to try to share my screen now. And thank you, Martha, for an excellent presentation. I just want to make sure, can everybody see my screen? Can you see my screen? I don't think I can see anybody, but
Yes.
Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can see.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Leo, for the, first of all, good evening, everyone. Thanks to Leo for extending an invitation to both Martha and myself to participate in this event tonight. I think this is the second one that we have done, Leo, with you, and it's always great and exciting having to engage with you on a topic that I know that you are very passionate about, and you share deeply the importance of connecting the intersection between racial justice and the environment. So we are very excited to be on the journey with you. So really appreciate you providing a space for us to be able to speak with you and the audience today. And I wanted to thank Martha for an excellent job on this project that we have been undertaking. I wanted to share just a few things tonight, with the audience, and hopefully we will get a little bit of interaction at the end of the presentation. I think Leo had asked me to just say a few words on conservation and human rights, and just following the presentation from Martha, as you can already see that there is a deep connection between the environmental agenda, nature conservation agenda, and human rights, particularly with issues around marginalization, engaging underrepresented groups. And early on when Leo gave his opening remarks, you could see on the one hand of one of the paper that looks at the role of the marginalized community in addressing the climate crisis. You can see on the right side a lot of the challenges that we face. So the work that Marta presented and the work that we're doing at Conservation International is really an effort to really bring the two together. Some people might say that conservation and human rights are incompatible. Those of us who have been following the conservation movement for the last 40 years, we know quite a lot about the challenges that conservation has in itself placed on marginalized communities, terms of fortress conservation and locking everything up and evicting people that are living on their land. So conservation has not had a good rap 40, 50, 60 years ago, but Conservation International has been one of these NGOs that have been at the forefront, engaging with indigenous people and local communities and marginalized communities more broadly, to ensure that we're integrating conservation and human rights and ensuring that the rights of people are upheld and respected, especially with respect to the agenda of conservation and the climate agenda. So I'll talk a little bit about why address rights in conservation, why it's important, the sources of rights in conservation, how human rights show up in conservation. I think it's an important thing for this audience. And I'll end a little bit on the rights-based approach that Conservation International has adopted. CI is one of the leading NGOs in that space, having been in the space working with indigenous people and local communities, particularly in South America, and work around the Amazon for the last 40 years. So we have learned quite a lot, and we have sort of adapted and adjusted based on what our indigenous brothers and sisters have been telling us about how we need to work together. So I'll talk a little bit about that and some information around the Conservation Initiative and Human Rights, of which CI has been a founding member. One of the slides I wanted to put up, pretty much, I mean, the point I wanted to make on that slide is that the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was adopted by the UN General Assembly at its third meeting, if you can imagine, in 1948. And the picture there is Eleanor Roosevelt, the wife of the former US president, and she's been a driving force behind that. So I say that because the issue of human rights and the Declaration of Human Rights, while in 1948 it hasn't been that long ago, and just imagine a number of the other structural issues, whether it's economic, whether it's education, whether it's social development, those things have actually, taken precedence when the declaration was put together, and making sure that the rights of people, the right to education, the right to be able to make money and to help your family and to lift yourself out of poverty, those things were taken precedent. But the issue of conservation and environment and climate are issues that are front and center right now. And this is where I think I will talk a little bit about some of the work that has been happening in that area. So you might ask the question, why address rights in conservation? There are many different thoughts on this. Conservation can help realize rights. I mean, CI is on the right side of the platform of the presentation in terms of working very clearly with indigenous people and local communities. Some of you may have heard the statistics that that 80% indigenous people and local communities, and that includes Afro-descendant people. We are just 5% of the population, but we sort of occupy 80% of the land. So I think it's very clear that in order to be able to address the global crisis, the climate crisis, or address the nature crisis, and we will not be able to achieve any of our ambitions or goals in those arenas without engaging, indigenous people and making sure that the rights of people are front and center. So one, why address rights in conservation? It can help realize rights at the front and center, making sure that we're advocating for indigenous people and making sure that they have access to the resource, access to finance, and we are supporting their self-determination and their rights to be able to make decisions where they live and how they manage their resource. Conservation can also undermine, and violate rights. And that's why I said sometimes you do have that little bit of a tension between conservation and rights and the incompatible between the two, but conservation can undermine rights. And this is something that, as we know that, as I said, 40, 50 years ago, with the idea of fortress conservation, the establishment of protected areas, there's been a lot of issues around that, especially around exclusion of people. So conservation can create harm. And there's obviously a lot of effort as we speak today to decolonize conservation. And that is sort of reimagining the conservation movement that reflects more of a rights-based approach that really puts people at the center of what we are dealing with. Conservation can be enhanced where rights are secure, and failure to conserve can undermine human rights. And we see a lot of the challenges we face in the space with respect to exploitation, deforestation, and other exploitation of marginalized people and their land. The people are signing away the rights to their land without really understanding what's really going on in that space. That in itself can be a challenge, right? Because we're dealing with the issue of exploitation and conservation, and the people in the exploitation space are also using marginalized communities to be able to get their space. So that can also happen as well. And what we are saying is that there are many complex rights. So it's a complicated process and the linkages between conservation and rights, but it's very important that we address it in conservation. Next slide. Great. What are the sources of rights? Just wanted to give, this is not an exhaustive list. International law, the codes of conduct, constitutions, local customs and practices. And that's what, as you can see, makes it a little bit more complex, right? Because depending on where you sit and where you are, you could be dealing with a legislation and a regulation and a government. There are issues of ethical and moral standards. And then you have the national constitution. And we see for some of our own constitutions, especially the work that needed to be done to ensure that rights are enshrined in some of those constitutions. So there are different sources of rights, and within that space, conservation is now operating within that space. Okay, even looking at how we address things like policy and how we advocate for the rights of people. How human rights show up in conservation, and this is an area where we've been spending a lot of time at CI in program design. I think gone are the days when conservationists and CI has been at the front, really leading in on some work on that. Gone are the days when people would show up in a community and just like work with the communities, but really not think about the co-creation and what the community is asking for. So in program design and delivery, we're engaging from the start, working with communities around capacity building and advocacy. One of the issues we have been dealing with, particularly with the Afro-descendant communities and indigenous people, is the issue of land tenure and rights to their land. So capacity building and advocacy around that. There's a big movement around environmental and social safeguards, where we are through our own project development and accountability, that the systems, CI in particular, have invested in environmental and social safeguards to ensure that the communities that we are working with, we are ensuring that their rights are protected and they're safe from harm, from any negative impact that these projects may have. Trainings on gender and safeguards. One of the other things that's also very important is indigenous negotiations. You may not think that, but a lot of times when indigenous communities are negotiating, particularly with companies that are coming in to do work in their land area, I think we have been very much invested in working with indigenous people to support capacity building and negotiation training so they can negotiate for their rights on their land. And the other area is respecting indigenous and traditional people's knowledge in all engagements. And that involves the free and prior and informed consent. But a lot of it now is the work that we are doing, particularly trying to make sure that we are supporting efforts to do research to ensure that there is visibility and representation of indigenous rights. In terms of the rights-based approach to conservation, CI has been at the forefront of, together with CI has been a member of the Conservation Initiative and Human Rights. And here we are pretty much focused on a number of key principles, which I will just flag for the group. Here we set up, I wanted to focus on not just the vision and the mission. Obviously, these are areas where CI has actually been working, but below, I think the 4 areas below, and that's how it shows up in our work. Respect human rights, we respect internationally human rights, and we take no action that contributes to the infringement of human rights. That as an organization, we promote human rights and well-being within our conservation programs, protecting the vulnerable, encouraging good governance, and working in partnership with indigenous people and local communities. So in a space of conservation and rights, these are the areas that show up quite frequently in the work that we do. And CI, as I said, has been at the forefront and very much focused on ensuring that in all the work that we do, we're integrating the rights of people, indigenous people and local communities in all the conservation endeavors that we have. So I just wanted to say a few words on conservation and rights, just to complement what Marta had presented. So thank you very much. Leo, over to you.
Thank you, Kelvin. Also, just let me say that we've been getting some incredible questions that I seeing in the chat. Thankfully, I can already assess that some of these questions have been at least partially addressed by Marta and Kelvin. But I will look forward to including as many of these questions as we can. I'm just going to go ahead preliminarily and share some of these questions so that our panelists can begin to think about them. One question asked, have you found tensions, including Afro-descendant people, along with or under the umbrella of indigenous people, and the biodiversity links? I think this is a very good question because it speaks to, especially here in North America, that very sharp distinction that is made between Afro-Indigenous people and African Americans, Indigenous people, et cetera, et cetera. Just another one I want to share here: what structures will be in place to protect Afro-descendant people communities from global conservation initiatives such as 3030? Another very good and topical question, I might add, and there are a few others. But before we get there, just let me speak and summarize. Thank you again, both Marta and Kelvin, for your work and for this incredible space joining us. I just want to point out as well the importance of this work. It brings incredible strength in that it brings quantitative data, figures, a lot of evidence, because I've actually seen the paper, of course, being part of that work that has been submitted for publication. This really helps because we understand that science and the scientific community, how scientists think and what scientists regard as evidence, as proof. Which is often very narrowly defined. So I'm very pleased that both of you not only bring that human dimensions, but bring that rigor and are talking the language of the scientific community, which has, as Kelvin said, been sometimes, frequently in many cases, harsh and marginalizing of Afro-descendant and BIPOC people. Kelvin, I also want to thank you for your sincerity as well in acknowledging the fact that conservation, while we are striking an incredibly positive and forward-looking note in terms of what the contributions have been and what we want to do, but that conservation organizations have for decades, for centuries, been at the throat and on the backs of Black and Indigenous communities and not supportive in any shape or form. And I might add, even a few decades ago, we might recall Conservation International itself was highlighted for these reasons, and which even makes the change and the discussion here. So beautiful, the fact that we can see the leadership coming out of Conservation International. Without lingering any further, I just wanted to pose a question to you. And Marta, please feel free to continue to respond in your native tongue. Just to both of you, can you, as people who identify as Afro-descendants, Black people, within the conservation NGO movement, you have spoken to the contribution, can you speak more specifically to your own roles, the importance of roles that you are currently playing, the places that you sit, the questions that you are asking? What has that experience been like at home and abroad, so to speak, within your organization and on the global stage? Both of you work globally. And, how do you see this work continuing?
Yeah, Leo, I mean, I will, jump in, and Marta, feel free to jump in. When I came to the organization, just 3 years ago now, and, I know that, and there's a number of colleagues in the organization that I, want to thank for this. I mean, I came in right after when we had the George Floyd incident, and you referenced it, right? And that movement was sweeping the globe, not just in the US, it went globally, went external. And, that while it started to really hit mainstream, America, right? North America, I think there were colleagues in the organization who really started to think about, maybe now is the opportunity time. We have finally got to the point where we probably need to put our foot to the pedal. And we need to really start to lean in. And obviously you referenced the issue with the Black Birder in Central Park. And we had the Black Birders Week. And you remember those things, Black Hikers Week, and the rise of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And CI was not immune to that. And like all other international peer organizations and corporate organizations, so changes started to happen in the organization. And there were colleagues in the organization who identify as Afro, who were really leaning in on, is now the time for the organization to really lean in and do this. So I came in at a time when there was, a movement that was already started. There was a journey that the institution was already on. CI, as I said early on, I mean, and you referenced, the challenge the organization has had 2 decades ago. If you're looking in the space where we operate, CI has had a very good experience engaging with indigenous people and local communities. The work that we do and studied in the Amazon, and obviously you cannot achieve those goals without addressing. So the organization has learned over time, and obviously we're still on a journey. There's still a lot to learn, but I think CI, among a lot of the institutions that I know, having been in this space for 20+ years, has been really advanced in terms of the work we are doing. But I came in the organization, and one of the things that, a colleague, I had a conversation with a colleague, and I said, well, maybe now is the time for us to really think about, is there an opportunity to engage Afro-descendant people? That, the topic was coming up, and I give a lot of credit to the he's now the Foreign Affairs Minister of Colombia. He's a brother from Colombia. He was the first Black Colombian ambassador to the US. He was at MIT. He was a scholar. He was the first, Black, Afro-Colombian Minister of Environment. And he had this vision that he was working on, which was, how do you sort of elevate and make visible the role of people of African descent around the issue of conservation and the environment. And, he came from Colombia. He knew the politics. He understood the environment. So we started to talk about the issue. And, and then that led to a conversation, right? About, we need to really elevate that issue. And we started to develop a program of work for the Afro-descendant people. And now we're here, and Marta came on board and we're joining. So I think the experience for me has been a growing one. I started, now Marta is on, and one of the things that's really fascinating, Leo, and, when you talk about how you sort of represent and change an organization, right? You're seeing, because in the movement, if you get into the Americas and you look at, people who work on environmental issues, whether it's Brazil, Colombia, or Mexico and so on, you hardly see a lot of people looking like Marta and myself, especially an Afro woman. So I think the fact that that is starting to build and we have this work and we're doing this research, I think it's great steps in the right direction. So my experience has been a positive one within the organization. And as I said, I'm riding on the shoulders of a lot of people in the organization who wanted to do this work, who was for a long time in the waiting, and maybe I came in at a time when I was able to advance it forward. But I think the progress has been great, and I think we're on the journey, and I think there's more to do. But I think from my own experience, it's been a positive one, and it'd be good to hear from Marta as well. But I thought that I give the organization a lot of credit, because I don't see other institutions. I don't see, and I don't want to call name of other organizations, but I don't see other peer organizations doing what CI has done. And for that, I'm very grateful for that.
Before Marta speaks, I just want to say as well, it's been good to see the initiative get started and also thrive, because many have argued that, you know, since George Floyd, since the Black Lives Matter movement, actually, we've seen the pendulum swing out, and then it has started to regress. It has started to swing back, and these initiatives have been marginalized, curtailed, et cetera, et cetera. So it's been incredible seeing the rollout and the thriving and the progress. I'd be very interested in hearing Marta's perspective, you know, from the Colombian side, from the South American side on these issues in terms of representation. We know that the issue of skin color identity, racial identity remains polarizing across many political borders that we're members of.
Bueno, Leo, Kelvin y todos los presentes, primero quiero decir que para mí también ha sido de un gran crecimiento profesional y personal el haber sido o haberme unido a CI. Y aplaudo o sea, todo el esfuerzo que ha hecho Kelvin. Kelvin es digamos, el creador de todo esto. Y como él mismo lo dice, en Latinoamérica no vemos personas como nosotros en cargos, ni en bancos, o sea, es algo bastante complejo lo que sucede en Latinoamérica. En mi experiencia, en lo que yo he podido estudiar, Latinoamérica y los Estados Unidos son totalmente dos cosas diferentes. Así que el race and ethnicity también tiene sus particularidades, lo diría yo. Y para poder implementar esta iniciativa afro acá en las Américas, sobre todo en la América tropical, tenemos que también tener unos fuertes argumentos, ¿sí? En cuanto a... Por eso nosotros empezamos por fortalecer la investigación. La investigación que dé fuerza a los argumentos de por qué trabajar con pueblos afro en conservación. Eso no significa que los pueblos afro estén con los brazos cruzados en Latinoamérica. Los movimientos afro en Latinoamérica son supremamente fuertes y tienen una cantidad de años de trayectoria, sobre todo en este país. Yo estoy en Colombia, estoy en una ciudad que se llama Cali, donde será próximamente la COP 16 de biodiversidad. Entonces, podemos decir que esta es la puerta a una de las regiones más biodiversas del mundo, diría yo, que es el Pacífico colombiano. Incluso diríamos que es más biodiversa que incluso la Amazonía. Es una selva húmeda tropical y es donde las comunidades afro están en mayor se encuentran localizadas en mayor proporción. La Constitución nuestra desde hace 30 años ha reconocido los derechos de los pueblos afro y ha sido pues una lucha de los movimientos afro. Pero si tú ves los movimientos afro, han logrado una gran visibilidad y una plataforma para que personas, incluso como yo, que hemos crecido en estos 30 años, podamos acceder, por ejemplo, a políticas diferenciales para educación, ¿sí? Así no, pero aquí yo diría no hay una clase media afro, como lo podemos ver en Estados Unidos. La gente se hace a pulso, ¿sí? Y fuera de eso, quienes podemos haber luchado por estudiar y ganar scholarships para hacerlo, ha sido a través de eso, de scholarships. Entonces, pero a la hora de emplearte, de buscar un empleo, es completamente muy difícil. Entonces, las personas afro en estas regiones, los índices de escolaridad, de políticas educativas son bastante precarios. Sin embargo, los movimientos afro han logrado una visibilidad y con ellos estamos trabajando. Con ellos queremos que nosotros mismos sacar adelante un programa afro, ¿sí? Y que con los pueblos indígenas habrá tanto cofradía como también conflictos por territorios, ¿sí? Se ve y es para también contestar una de las preguntas. Pero el hecho de estar compartiendo sobre todo el Pacífico, y es en semejante biodiversidad, selva húmeda tropical, estos dos pueblos sumados están haciendo una gran labor por proteger uno de las regiones más diversas del mundo. CI está comprometido en poder avanzar con fortalecimiento organizativo, con ese fortalecimiento que ellos están para su autodeterminación, para tomar decisiones sobre estos recursos y poder ser partícipes y tener voz por ejemplo, en las COPs, ¿sí? Son sus territorios y otros están tomando decisiones sobre estos territorios. Y no les preguntamos ni a los afro ni a los indígenas que han vivido ahí, sobre todo los afro, casi 500 años, con la selva en pie y desarrollando una economía que los ha mantenido y ha mantenido los ecosistemas para todos nosotros. No sé si me expliqué o si me cuentas si respondí la pregunta.
Thank you, Martha. Yeah, most definitely. While you were speaking, I was thinking about very recent work that has come out of Jamaica about the Jamaican Maroons. You spoke very importantly about the Maroons. That Jamaican Maroons for centuries didn't keep ungulates, goats, stuff like that, because these goats would make noise. They didn't want to be found. They were hiding in the hills, but in conservation, we understand now that, these ground foraging ungulates are the worst for forests. They'll eat everything. Everything that, they can reach, they'll eat the tablecloth off your dining table. They'll eat it. So, simple practices as, not keeping goats and cows and, maintaining forest for protection has really not been recognized. And these many ways and bringing this data and these figures,
I think, Leo, one thing I wanted to add to what Martha said, and Martha made a very good point, and you said it before. I think that, the language language is really, I mean, language and storytelling is really important. And I think one of the things we're really trying to focus on is how do we tell the story, right? Because, you know, I don't think people, I mean, everybody, when we talk about the issue of marginalization and climate vulnerability and so on, you know, Afro-descendant people, when we look at where we live and where we work and you know, and the kind of pressures that come at Afro people, we fall right within that place of vulnerable. So we can keep screaming and shouting that we are vulnerable, help us, help us, help us. I think what we are trying to do is to go on the offense. We are trying to move away from the defense, we're going on the offense. And on the offense is not that okay. And I said, and I give a lot of credit to our indigenous brothers and sisters, right? Because they have been on the offense. They have suffered quite a lot. They've gone on the offense, and they have the UN Declaration for Indigenous People and local community. They have, you know, at the COP, they're fairly well organized. We have a very clear statistic. 80% of the land is being stewarded by IPLCs, only occupy 5% of the population. You will not get to 1.5 or address the issue. So I think the world has caught up and noticed. I think what we're trying to really do, as you've said earlier on, is the scholarship, right? It's the idea that when people are Afro people in the Caribbean or in Latin America, oh, we play soccer, you know, we cook good food, we are good to hang out, we like carnival, we party and so on. But people never really think about, well, okay, the air that you breathe, you know, the protection that's coming from Afro people, our lands are being stewarded well by our people who have a traditional knowledge of the land and ethnobotany and those type of things. So what we're trying to do is to create that scholarship and that thought leadership and go on the offense. And part of that is bringing allies to the table, allies, donors, and partners. Because I think part of what we're trying to do as well is, you know, like everything else, we're trying to attract, you know, the sort of the present day support, right? We need donors, we need people, we need partnerships like yourself. We need, you know, all these sort of institutions that are leaning in and investing in elevating and promoting the voices and visibility of marginalized people. This is an issue for them. And this is an issue for the planet. That's why I think the work that we are communicating through the paper is that you will not get to 1.5 without investing and supporting people of African descent. Because guess what? The lands that they're stewarding, the size of the land, the sort of the biodiversity that it harbors, the irrecoverable carbon that it has, these are the things that will get us to 2050. So we're going on the offense now, right? And I think that's where we need all that support. So I wanted to add to what Martha was saying is that, you know, I think we're trying to, you know, it's not that the climate vulnerability is not there and we'll continue to flag it, but I think we have a story to tell, Leo.
Yes.
And we got to tell that story. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. And going back to what Martha said in her own addressing one of the questions about the indigenous people, this is by no means an attempt to minimize the contributions, as you have both said, of indigenous people. But here's the thing. I can look on my shelf right over my head. You know, there's Braiding Sweetgrass. There is quite a few books, you know, showing and speaking quite profoundly and well written in terms of the contribution, past and present, of indigenous people. Where are the books for the Afro-descendants? Yeah. Where has that been described and iconified and celebrated? And who knows about it? You know, so this work really will send ripple effects, and actually is quite an eye-opener for so many. Martha, I think you were gonna.
Sí, Leo. Yo quería elaborar un poco en lo que tú dijiste y lo que también dijo Kelvin. La contribución afro a africana a las Américas es algo que está invisibilizado, pero sí hay mucha investigación alrededor de esto. Y ojalá puedan ustedes ir a los libros escritos, por ejemplo, por Judith Carney, en la revisión de literatura y en todo lo que nosotros hemos estado investigando desde hace varios años ya, Mucha de la investigación sobre esto está en non-Spanish speaking countries, porque en Estados Unidos, en Holanda, los Países Bajos, en Brasil. Y tú hablabas ahora de las cabras. Y por darte un ejemplo de la gran biodiversidad que vino de África a las Américas, acá en las Américas no había cabras, no había ganado vacuno, no había cerdos, no había ovejas. Es algo que se le debe a África, porque ni siquiera las vacas de Suiza, cuando si iban a llegar acá, acá estamos en el trópico. Suiza está en otra latitud. Sí, entonces todo esto llegó a través de los barcos, de esclavizados. En los barcos de esclavizados, que más o menos eran 80.000 viajes contados en los 4 o 5, en los 4 siglos que hubo esclavización. Mucha de lo que nosotros ahora comemos, como el plátano, el banano, el arroz, que es un arroz, el arroz del sur de los Estados Unidos. Nos dice Judith Carne que es el oriza glavérrima que viene de África y su técnica fue africana para adaptarla aquí. Entonces, yo quiero resaltar la gran importancia de los pueblos afrodescendientes en las Américas, porque cuando vinieron acá eran indígenas en África. Ni siquiera África había sido colonizada. No hablaban inglés, no hablaban francés, no, sí, era el continente africano y llegaron aquí pueblos indígenas africanos del trópico africano y llegaron del trópico también a los Estados Unidos donde hay 4 estaciones. Entonces, la capacidad de adaptación de los pueblos afro a estos nuevos ecosistemas es inmensa, porque según estos científicos, entre África y las Américas solamente el 1% de la flora y de la fauna se parecen, no más. Entonces, la contribución para la biodiversidad de las Américas es muy grande y su capacidad de adaptación a esas regiones donde ustedes viven en los Estados Unidos y adaptar especies del África a esos ecosistemas de los Estados Unidos son champions ellos, ¿sí? Entonces, por eso nosotros decimos que en este momento donde están habitando los pueblos afro en las Américas, acá en la América tropical, por eso todavía se mantiene el dosel del bosque y todavía se mantiene la biodiversidad. Y esto es lo que nosotros tenemos que hacer para que los pueblos nosotros los afro conozcamos esto, porque esta historia está sin contar, ¿sí? Y esto es lo que nos da a nosotros el coraje de pararnos y decir, la economía también ha dependido de nosotros y de que nosotros adaptamos las especies como la caña de azúcar acá en las Américas para poder hacer azúcar. Acá no habían gramíneas en las Américas, solamente tal vez las de las llamas y las alpacas en las montañas. Esto era pura selva tropical. Entonces, por eso decimos que nosotros también apoyamos a adaptar, así fuera a la fuerza, pero nos tocó apoyar a adaptar hasta los mismos europeos a las Américas. ¿No?
I want to pick up on a point that you both made in terms of, and speak specifically to the point about what does it mean to be Afro-descendant and also an environmental protector, especially those who are leaders and have been publicly standing up for forest land conservation. Because to your point, Marta, we're talking about a population that has been disproportionately exiled historically, and have the legacy of lack of infrastructure, support from the state in terms of education, educational opportunities. So frequently they're entering the space of being advocates, of being the voice of their community and the voice of the land, the voice of biodiversity, with frequently sometimes their bodies, but without what is common on this call, higher degrees, so to speak, or years of work for international organizations, so to speak. I'm just going to play a very brief clip about the Escuzo agreement. But specifically, when we come back, I want to ask both of you to think as our final question before I go to the questions from the group. When you think about training for Afro-descendants, indigenous people who are, especially young people, and a lot of young people on this call in terms of entering the arena, the field of becoming advocates, activists, what do you see that training, the future of that training being like? So let me just share my screen quickly and so we can do this. So this is from Human Rights Watch. Just reshare just to make sure. Yep, I have the share sound there. So hopefully everybody will hear this.
Latin America and the Caribbean have a plan to protect the environment. It is the Escazú Agreement, designed to protect biodiversity and the environmental defenders in the region. The agreement guarantees access to information about the environment, ensures public participation in environmental decision-making, facilitates access to justice to protect the right to a healthy environment, helps protect the environmental defenders and investigate and punish violence against them. The agreement is essential because preserving the Amazon and forests in Latin America is key to curbing climate change. Biodiversity is deteriorating at an unprecedented rate. Those defending the environment, many of them indigenous, are under attack. Did you know Latin America is the most dangerous region in the world for land rights and environmental activists, with dozens killed every year? Where are we now? 15 countries have ratified the Escazú Agreement, but 18 have yet to do so, among them Brazil, which holds 60% of the Amazon. The deal is now with Brazil's Congress. Legislators should approve it without delay. All countries in Latin America and the Caribbean should ratify the Escazú Agreement and take immediate steps to implement it and protect the environment and those who defend it. Our planet depends on it.
I want to point out as well that that video does mention and center indigenous people. It does not mention Afro-descendant people. Yet we know that Afro-descendants in countries such as Colombia continue to pay with their lives. Horroring for those who know of those cases in particular. But specifically going to my question, how do you advise and think about programs in terms of conservation leadership programs, or speaking to those who are listening, whose intention currently and future involve advocacy and activism in the region of interest, in Latin America, in the Caribbean, in places like Honduras, Colombia, etc. Kelvin, you're muted.
Yeah, I was just saying that that's a good question, Leo. I mean, Marta is living obviously in Colombia, so she can speak to that experience there. But I to your specific question, I think that in every struggle, right, there's going to be a need for some form of activism and advocacy. And as I said earlier on, within the context of CI, I mean, CI has been, one of the champions, around the conservation initiative on human rights, right? Where we are really promoting and pushing a rights-based approach, and everything around respect for human rights, promote human rights and human well-being, protecting the vulnerable, encouraging good governance, and working in partnership. It's really important, right? The rights of people that needs to be protected. I think part of the investment and engagement is going to be around things like negotiation training. As I was saying, one of the things that CI has been really investing in as part of our rights-based approach, especially with indigenous people and local communities, is in conflict resolution, training in conflict resolution. What are the type of capacity building and tools that we need to provide to communities so they can they can address issues of conflict with especially around natural resource use on their land. Things like negotiation training, as I said, that while in the past, the pressure was coming from conservationists, and we have fortress conservation, and the challenge is now we are up against big businesses, right? And I'm not surprised that Brazil hasn't signed on to this, because, we are operating in a space where you're going up against big businesses with mining interests and other interests that have very strong lobbying and economic powers, including the US, right? We have this lobbying that happens here, and there's a lot of influential groups that have power, especially private sector business and so on. So we've been investing in those things. We work a lot with we work with corporations to make sure that they themselves are upholding human rights, ethics, and morals aligned with CI. So I would see, if I'm advising young people that are, it's the issue of activism, investing in negotiation training and conflict resolution and so on. It's going to be part of this, right? But the broader thing is, obviously nobody should be put in harm's way, or that's the thing, right? That's the whole issue of Universal Declaration for Human Rights. So that would be my sort of recommendation and advice. We are sort of leaving it, while we may not come out and people talk about people have different views on the Escazú agreement. At the end of the day, is how do you invest in people to make sure that they can negotiate for their own, because the issue, it's not a homogeneous group, right, that you're working with. So I would just advise that as an opportunity.
Might I leave to respond before we go on?
Sí, como lo mencionó Kelvin, yo soy de Colombia, un país que ha visto caer sus líderes, hombres y mujeres, a manos de intereses y de power, ¿sí? Different powers. Entonces, es algo muy doloroso, pero yo siempre estoy en los lugares locales, junto a las comunidades, y veo cómo los líderes y lideresas afro, sobre todo, y he visto las lideresas y líderes indígenas también, cómo entienden lo que está pasando y están defendiendo sus territorios, porque si ven, están en grandes territorios llenos de selva, y son en Colombia los territorios afro y los territorios indígenas son titulados a ellos y son inalienables, o sea, no se los pueden quitar, no se los pueden expropiar, ellos tampoco los pueden vender, son territorios colectivos y por constitución ellos son autoridades dentro de esos territorios. Entonces eso hace que el movimiento afro sea bastante fuerte en el país. Entonces yo diría que el apoyo a estos movimientos, al fortalecimiento de estos líderes, a que haya un relevo generacional. Nosotros estamos apostando también por eso, porque la gente también tenga la fortaleza de manejar sus propios proyectos, de manejarlos y que yo no voy a decir que todo el mundo piensa igual en los pueblos afro, somos bastante diversos, pero hay unos acuerdos internos también que nosotros también estamos escuchando, siguiendo unos mecanismos de toma de decisiones locales, regionales y que incluso trascienden la consulta previa y que nosotros tenemos que tener en cuenta cuando entramos a trabajar con ellos. Es poder fortalecer el liderazgo a través de la práctica, del aprender haciendo. También fortalecer esos liderazgos para que ellos mismos se blinden ante todos los intereses que ahí pueda haber. Entonces, nuestra labor es por fortalecer estas personas y estos liderazgos. Unos caen, ellos mismos lo dicen. Nosotros sabemos que estamos en un gran peligro, pero estamos tratando de hacer un relevo para que los territorios que nos dejaron nuestros ancestros podamos continuar en ellos. Entonces es, como dijo Kelvin, apoyar eso que están haciendo los movimientos afro y fortalecerlos, porque algún día la iniciativa Afro para las Américas se va a ir, ¿sí? O CI ya no va a estar en el terreno y son los mismos pueblos afro que tienen que defender sus territorios y lo han hecho por 400 años. Llegaron los españoles, llegaron los la gente con los fusiles, la gente de las FARC, de la guerrilla, de los paramilitares, y ahí están. Eso se llama resiliencia. Entonces, es poder apoyar a que construyan y reconstruyan a partir de esa experiencia.
Martha, after that, I want nothing more. That was just so beautiful and so moving thinking about all that. You know, I also just want to celebrate both of you. You know, I'm more so familiar with the work of Kelvin. You know, Kelvin and I ran for over 6 years the Conservation Leadership in the Caribbean program out of St. George's University there on Grenada. You know, bringing in cohorts of 18 students after 18 students after 18 students, 2 years, you know, using our own salaries to support that work, Kelvin, you know, so going back to what you were saying, Martha, you know, it's that giving spirit. And as you said, you know, doing this work also is also acknowledging that risk and also understanding, you know, that, you know, it can create loss. You know, money loss and sometimes much more than money, some irreplaceable loss. You know, so again, thank you both for your work. We're in our last 7 minutes, but I again, you know, we have some powerful stuff. Yes, so going back to, we answered the question about the interrelations between African descendant people and indigenous people, so I'll skip that one. And if any of you want to speak to the question, what structures will be in place to protect Afro-descendant people communities from global conservation initiatives such as the 3030 initiative? So another question here, are you concerned that US courts will weaken environmental protection approaches that might spread to neighboring countries? We do know that there is a rise of conservatism and conservative governments globally as a global trend. So, you know, let's start there.
Yeah, no, we are very concerned, and I think I say that not just on behalf of CI. You know, I think for all of us who are actively engaged in efforts that are really trying to bring everybody together, to build a big tent, to bring a big tent approach to addressing this global crisis of nature and climate, I think, we're watching very closely what's happening in the US. I mean, if you recall, before this current administration, right? What happened was that the immediate thing was to pull out from the Paris Agreement by an executive order, and that had a lot of implications, right? Even things like, funding that goes into things like the Green Climate Fund and other sort of initiatives that opens the door for marginalized groups like indigenous people and local communities and even Afro-descendant people to be able to have access to climate finance, right? Even those doors that are starting to open now. And obviously we still have a lot of work to do. There's a lot of work that needs to be done to continue to engage with marginalized communities and build the capacity. We talk a lot about relationship-based philanthropy and trust-based philanthropy. You'll probably read a lot about that. I mean, the idea is that we need to be able to create the structures to allow our indigenous brothers and sisters and Afro-descendant people to be able to make it easier for them to be able to access the kind of funding that they need to be able to practice conservation in their own way, right? As we know that this is how the impact is going to be. So yeah, we're absolutely worried, and I think everybody that is really focused on how we sort of address the climate crisis, how we build a big tent, how we bring everybody together, I think it's a potential concern. So yes, I to the person who asked that question, yes, we are concerned, and we know that when the dominoes fall in the US, it certainly has implications, right, for the Americas and even Europe and other governments themselves that are pledging to continue to support this very important issue. So we are concerned, and we but obviously, like everything else, we need to prepare that doesn't happen. We need to make sure that doesn't happen.
Martha, I'd like to pose that second question to you about governments and conservative leaning governments and those trends that we have also seen in many countries in south of the US border as well. Concerns or other things of note in relation to that intersection with environmental protection and ADP people.
Bueno, quiero empezar por mencionar lo que los pueblos afro y los pueblos indígenas nos dicen, y dicen con gran vehemencia. El mundo está poniéndose en dos sacos a la población, un saco para la derecha y otro saco para la izquierda. Nosotros somos pueblos indígenas, los mismos pueblos afro en Latinoamérica. Dicen, nuestros territorios están en un saco o en el otro, ¿sí? Y están tomando decisiones sobre nuestros territorios y nuestra vida. Por eso queremos avanzar hacia la autodeterminación y hacia la titulación de nuestras tierras. Esto que para poder ser más autónomos, esto no gusta a un saco o al otro. Yo no estoy hablando sí, Latinoamérica se está radicalizando y también, y no solamente nosotros, el mundo está yendo hacia allá. Y tenemos un gran peligro de volver digamos, voy a usar esa palabra, que es asesinar la razón, que ocurrió al inicio del siglo XX con las dos guerras mundiales. Creo que nosotros no hemos aprendido la lección, parece, ¿sí? Entonces, vemos con preocupación cómo la deshumanización de los pueblos afroindígenas ha vuelto al argot de quienes incluso quieren ahora estar en la presidencia de estos países. La deshumanización, eso que vino con la colonización, y con las repúblicas que hizo en Colombia una ley. Nosotros acá en Latinoamérica siempre tenemos al Jim Crow de los Estados Unidos, pero nosotros tuvimos unas leyes en 1922, en los años 20, también de miscegenation, que fueron las leyes de blanqueamiento. Y por eso ahora las generaciones, incluso actuales, todavía están permeadas por esa forma de pensar. Por eso el racismo se incrementa acá, es latente y es evidente, pero es callado, ¿sí? Es muy diferente lo que ocurre, cómo se ve el racismo o cómo se aborda el racismo en los Estados Unidos a cómo se aborda en Colombia o en los otros países de Latinoamérica. Entonces, estamos viendo que eso se está incrementándose y lo vemos con preocupación. Como afro, como mujer afro, lo veo con preocupación, ¿sí? Entonces, creo que el fortalecimiento de los liderazgos, de blindar los territorios, de blindar las comunidades, puede ayudarnos a todos, porque esto no solamente es cuestión de los pueblos afro, de los pueblos indígenas, es cuestión de todos, porque en esos territorios, como lo dijo Kelvin, esos territorios requieren ser protegidos y aportar a los procesos que llevan ellos. Así que no tengo una respuesta para eso, pero tenemos que decirle a todo el mundo que no volvamos a matar la razón.
Yes. Martha, Kelvin, thank you. As Martha ended, for many of these questions, we don't have answers, but, they are things that we're working to advance and continue and push for. And we are delighted to have so many people who have joined us this evening for this first Critical Voices in Environmental Justice Spring 24 CLACS Colloquium, or Voices or Labor Recognizing Afro-descendant Peoples' Role in Securing Nature in the Americas. Again, I would just like to thank Professor Kaya Shivers, Professor Pamela Kaye, Dylan Robbins, the Director of the Center for Latin American Caribbean Studies, Dean Julie Mostov, the Dean of Liberal Studies, Jonna Vitale, who heads the Office of Sustainability, and the support of the Office of Global Inclusion. Everybody, to our students who joined us this evening, thank you all. And we look forward to continuing this discussion. Just before I go, I'd just like to say that our next event that is going to be on March 25th is entitled Sexuality, Gender, and Climate Vulnerability in the Caribbean. And we have 3 incredible leaders in the environmental movement. One coming to New York from Barbados, the other coming from the Grenadines, and another from Puerto Rico to discuss this topic. Dynamic presenters, women, leaders in the environmental movement, and also 2 of them leaders in the LGBTQ movement. Looking forward to that discussion. Thank you all again, and see you all soon. Thank you, Kelvin. Thank you, Martha.
Bye, Martha. Nice to see you. Bye, everyone.
Thank
Bye,
you,
Dylan.
Martha. Thank you, Kelvin.